Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. So Nichiren has very few times in all of the letters that are collected that are attributed either directly to Nichiren or written capturing his dialogues with his senior followers. Very few mentions of Gohonzon specifically as to a definition. But when he has defined it, he's defined it as a word, what Go signifies, what Honzon signifies. And I have talked about it here on this resource and documented it as the very aspect of our emergent property, mind, to be shifted from a samsaric perspective of categorization, identification, the warehouse building, database of identification and labeling in an effort not only to capture and maintain some permanent idea of things. That's what identification is. This is that, that is this. I put this label on that, so whenever I say this label or indicate this label, I know, you know, everyone knows this idea of what this is. I call this a rock. You in your mind have an image of what a rock is. I have an image of what a rock is. They may not be identical, but they're similar enough that using the label rock, we all agree about something. This is the human experience in all things, yes? All right, that's samsara. That's the mind of samsara. Samsara is a term that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's a condition of mind. You have to understand this about Buddhism. It's always, 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 always about the mind. The universe, planets, rocks, suns, stars, water, fire, all of that, that's just the process of life. That's the engine of life. That's the universe, potential energy expressing itself. Everything else that is conjured in the mind as an impression of that process is what Buddhism is about. And so the human experience is contained not in this body, but in the mind. And the mind is very intimately connected, as it were, to the physical body. So we talk about muscle memory and those kind of things. But those are physical attributes. They're not the mind. They're separate things. So when Buddha talks about, or Shakyamuni Buddha more accurately, talks about samsara, he's talking about an aspect of mind. This is why Vasubandhu dug so deeply into the citas, the way, the conditions and tendencies of thought, of collection of attributes leading to the skandhas, the consciousness of seeing with an eyeball and the nerves from the eyeball going to the brain and that data being accumulated. And then the mind hovers above this and says, we'll call that blue. We'll call that rock. We'll call that sensual. We'll call that abhorrent. How intimate is the mind with the brain? that becomes a very fluid discussion, no pun intended. But the point is, people like Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, names don't come to mind right now, hundreds of years of Buddhists interpreting from the very earliest teachings of Shakyamuni through the latter and into Mahayana analysis, all dissecting this organism of human consciousnesses, right? And how we form an impression of our life and our environment together, interplaying. Right? That whole incredible thing is samsara. Samsara is the sentient mind identifying. That's the default position of the sentient mind. Creating the database, housing it in a warehouse called self, I. And that the aspect of that self is, because it's constructed of such a vast set of data, becomes almost monolithic, like the Great Wall of China. It becomes very, very impenetrable, difficult to change, like a huge ship in the ocean. It can't turn on a dime. It takes miles for a huge ship to change direction. Depending on how much it changes direction, so on and so forth. So that's samsara. It's a trap of sorts, and that's what Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, is identifying. In saying there is a way for your mind not to get rid of all of that, but to free itself from the monolith, from the warehouse, from the database, and stop being constantly craving identification, and just pause for a moment. Let everything be identified, that's fine. But all that identifying, that's just a database, one of 8 billion now, and it's not that unique. What is unique is you. So where is the you? Who's driving this warehouse, this database? Who's managing all of this data? And for what purpose? Because the only purpose that seems to ultimately derive from that activity is stress and anxiety. How many do I have? What do I know? What do I not know? How much more of that do I need? When will I be a complete whatever? A complete man, a complete woman, a complete architect, a complete artist, on and on and on. We never stop. And so it took 12 years of working on this problem, and Shakyamuni came to a stunning realization. That when you finally realize that everything in your database, in their database, in all the warehouses, if you step out of that warehouse and observe the entirety of the universe, your sentient mind, not this, but your sentient mind, it's constructing its witness, its experience, moment to moment to moment to moment, the same way the rock is, the same way blue is, the same way all phenomena is just an expression of potential, and that expression, key here, happening moment to moment to moment to moment. It's recurring. And we know this because we have these abstract concepts called aging, and a weird dialogue around time. But if we really, really dissect the human experience, the mind's experience, we can see, we can witness that everything arises in a moment, abides for a time, and then even as it's abiding, simply because our senses are rather dull, things are degrading to dissolution. Everything has this arc, including our own lives, right? We don't perceive ourselves aging from morning to afternoon, and yet we know it's occurring. 6 months go by and we might, I see my aging. But it's happening moment to moment to moment. Our senses are too dull to see with that level of dissection. But what if you could awaken in your mind like another muscle? And that mind muscle would be the muscle that was not wrapped up in craving identification. That muscle were actually an experience of the moment-to-moment engine of life. Right now, right now. Wow, look at this. Wow. You know, when I was younger, I used to sit and look at sunsets as my feet on the ground or my butt sitting in the sand or wherever I was, and this sun, this big light orb, would disappear behind mountains or behind the ocean or whatever. But I always felt like something else was going on. Until one day, I deeply considered the immensity of this rock that I'm standing on, sitting on, with you and I, sitting. We are on this massive rock. And this sun, this little ball of light in the air, is much bigger than the rock we're standing on, and so incredibly, unfathomably far away. So intense is this star in the sky, and that what if it's not going anywhere, and it's this vast rock of ours that's slowly tilting away from it? That largesse, that sense of, I almost could feel the inertia of it. Of course I couldn't, but my mind, my imagination was blown away at this idea, the largesse of it. I couldn't point to it. I'm trying to use words to describe it, but there was a major shift going on in my perception, in my mind. That aha, that insight moment, that renge we've discussed, that's Gohonzon. Yeah. That mind cracking open that shell, not warehouse. This is on a whole other order of witnessing, understanding. Now crack open the universe and every single phenomena within it, and perceive it from this altered reality. Right? Altered. Right? It doesn't take long before you enter that mindset that when you go back, as it were, to normal, everyday samsara, that it is samsara that's altered. Samsara is not fact, not true. It is a couch that we surround ourselves with in order to identify self. But if you move your mind away from that just a bit and observe it as the process of how you construct you, self, I. It's like that shift of realization of the sun isn't falling behind the mountains, the trees, the ocean. It's the ocean and the trees and the mountains that are getting in the way of the sun. Oh my goodness. This is so immense. I can only, with my mind, try to embrace the largesse of that. But just trying is, it's a huge paradigm shift. That shift, that realization, that is Gohonzon. Why do I say all of this? Because it's easy to miss that when we read all of these hundreds and thousands of words of Nichiren and Tendai and so on and so forth. It's easy to miss that what Nichiren is talking about when he talks about Shakyamuni's story about this, Tendai's elucidation about this, the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment, the lifespan chapter where Shakyamuni says, you think I reached this thing in this lifetime as a man and I call it Buddha. What you don't understand is that Buddha is the universe in action, in its process. Buddha is your mind seeing that, getting it. Buddha is this identification of awareness, a mind's ability. What penetrates your mind to open that huge awareness that is not held back by, bound by, owned by samsaric experience? Right? Shakyamuni is constantly talking about this alternate reality that has always been there, but calls Buddha the way the sentient mind sees, witnesses, observes that experience. And all Nichiren does is say, there's this paradigm shift, there's this altered state from samsara to, Buddha's in the mind. This interface, this leap from samsara to Buddha-ness, that's Gohonzon. And it's in the title, Myoho Renge-kyo, the title Myoho Renge-kyo. The characters Ren and Ge are talking about this interface. Ren-ge. Ren-ge is penetrating this new mind of perception. And so as he talks, it becomes obvious after getting this thinking in gear that although he doesn't necessarily say, okay, here's Gohonzon, here's what I mean by Gohonzon, here's our ultimate objective goal, most honorable aim of mind, Honzon. He is talking about it through the words of Shakyamuni and his own words and other scholars. He's defining the experience of Gohonzon to manifest, to witness, to engage with Buddha-ness. But it's very hard to see that until somebody helps you to understand what that is. And it is not, once you understand that, it's easy to understand, oh, the scroll, the mandala is not that. The mandala is an incredible, concise distillation of this tool, this insight to Renge. So the mandala becomes a very precious thing to allow us to immediately eliminate the distractions in our lives and focus on Myoho, potential instantiation, Myoho. If I can focus on Myoho and the integration here with samsara, my mind, my human existence, my potential to experience, with Myoho instantiating my potential, Renge, to then penetrate, to establish my Gohonzon portal, if you will, my paradigm shift. Kyo, I get it. I get Buddha-ness, the Dharma. It's in that very formula. Myoho Renge Kyo. By invoking it, by owning it, by being present in it, dedicating one's mind to that portal, that Gohonzon of Renge. There it is, Buddha-ness. That's the whole ball of works. And we have these tools, this tool, the mandala, to help to bring our focus in to bear on this very direct formula of invoking our Buddha-ness. I saw a video the other day on Big Think, a YouTube channel, talking about flow, F-L-O-W, flow. I've heard lots of discussions about flow. But I was listening to this guy, and everything he was saying, the adjectives he was using, the concentration he was talking about, the things necessary to get into flow, he could just as easily have been talking about chanting. The very mechanism we use when we sit at attention and we focus our attention with a mandala, and we concentrate on a goal, on a purpose. All these words he was using, I said, oh my goodness, he could just be talking about Nichiren's mandala, the Gohonzon, and Buddha-ness being the flow. Penetrating the flow of life, moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. Flow. I thought, what a perfect discussion. I should tell people about it. But he was using the very words. He wasn't talking about Buddhism, but he was talking about the same mechanism. The insights, the aha. We all know it. Right? This is why when people ask me, what should I be thinking? What should my mindset be? What should be my attitude when I chant to my mandala? Nichiren's already told us. With single-mindedness. Everything you're thinking about what should I think about, what should my attitude be, that's samsara. That's the world of things. Why would you bring that to your enlightenment? The whole point is to let it go. Not destroy it, but let it go as an attachment of identity. Because the identity you want when you're in front of your mandala is Buddha. Nothing else. Because that's all-inclusive. When you are in Buddha, you are contemporaneous with life, the entirety of the universe. Nothing is foreign. Nothing needs identity. Everything simply is doing the same thing as you. Now. Being. Wow. Oh, so that's how we're all the same. Right? That saying sounds silly and mystical, but when you understand it's the process we're talking about, oh. Namo Myo Renge Kyo. So, let's read a little bit more. Nichiren on Mandala and Gohonzon. Oh, I was going to say, as I've talked about before, these books that I've been offering up as ebooks, and think of them. Not sure. Now I can't think. I think I'm offering them up as print books as well. Gosh, I don't remember now. I'm thinking of doing another one on a big subject that's never really drilled down into, certainly from the perspective of Nichiren, and that is karma. So I think the next in the series will be Nichiren on karma. How useful would that be? What goshos, what letters, what discussions does Nichiren offer all of his followers in treatises and personal letters where he is actually defining the nature of karma? How easy is that to look up? Not so. I don't think it exists. So I'd like to make a book like this one, like the one I did on, excuse me, darn throat, on the essentials of Daimoku, right? So I will go through the writings of Nichiren, and I will call several gosho where he makes clear the nature of karma. I think that's a useful study tool. Right? If you have an idea for another aspect of Buddhism that you don't find there's a clear collection of thoughts that we could discuss on certain terms or aspects or ideas within Buddhism, let me know. Let me know in the comments. I think that's how I could most constructively use my time to create, again, as always, a fundament of support for your confidence and your embrace and determination to open that Gohonzon mind and experience Buddha-ness, yeah? So we're in the midst of opening of the eyes. And where we left off last time was the idea of how many people might be of the capacity, of the open-mindedness to understand this, or to even accept that this is something to know. Even within Buddhism, lots of people practicing Buddhism don't understand or can't conceive of something outside of their identity, their ego. This is something Shakyamuni identified with the followers of the early teachings. They inculcated everything they were doing according to the teachings of Shakyamuni as self-achieved. Like Buddha was a badge you wore when you passed a certain amount of tests. I am. Instead of there is me. There is you. There is in the universe all things instantiating moment to moment. And that realization is not you or me or identification. It is Buddha. It is the life expressing itself. There is life. Not my life, not your life, not her life, not its life. Life. It seems like such a simple thing in words, but to really get it, that's another matter. And so we just got through Shakyamuni identifying that everybody's got a mind, But the mind that's ready to explore this new understanding of reality, less than the dirt sands on a fingernail. Right? So he goes on. In the reign of a worthy ruler, what is reasonable will prevail. But when a foolish ruler reigns, I wonder who could that be, then what is unreasonable will have supremacy. One should understand that in similar fashion, when a sage is in the world, then the true significance of the Lotus Sutra will become apparent. In my remarks here, I have been contrasting the early sutras with the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra, and it would appear as though the early sutras are in a position to prevail, because they're easier to understand, right? They're more relatable. But if they really win out over the theoretical teaching, then it means that Shariputra and the other persons of the two vehicles will never be able to attain Buddhahood. That would surely be lamentable, right? Within the context of understanding the Lotus Sutra, no wonder many of these other offshoots and derivations want to crap on the Lotus Sutra, because it scares them, it intimidates them. It says they have not accomplished what they would like to claim they've accomplished. Because claiming it, identity, that's everything. Do you see the problem? It's so obvious to us now, in this era, in this time, right? I turn now to the second important teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, was born in the Kalpa of Continuance, in the 9th period of decrease, when the span of human life measured 100 years. He was the grandson of King Simahahanu and the son of the heir of the king Shuddhadana. As a boy, he was known as Crown Prince Siddhartha, or the Bodhisattva, all goals achieved. At the age of 19, he left his family, and at 30, he attained enlightenment. At his place of enlightenment, the world-honored one first revealed the ceremony of Vairocana Buddha of the Lotus Treasury World, a land of actual reward, and expounded the 10 mysteries, the 6 forms, the perfect interfusion of all things, and the subtle and wonderful great teaching for immediate attainment of the ultimate fruit. He was trying to teach immediate, perfect self-realization, enlightenment, Buddhahood. But the people of his day were like, what in the hell are you talking about? What gymnastics do we have to do to get to that place? Maybe you've spent too long under that tree, yeah? Nichiren goes on, at that time, the Buddhas of the 10 directions appeared on the scene, and all the Bodhisattvas gathered about like clouds. In view of the place where Shakyamuni preached, the capacity of the listeners, the presence of the Buddhas, and the fact that it was the first sermon, is there any reason the Buddha could have concealed or held back the great doctrine? Therefore, the Flower Garland Sutra says, quote, he displayed his power freely and expounded a sutra of perfection and fullness, end quote. The work, which consists of 60 volumes, is indeed a sutra of perfection and fullness in its every character and stroke. And if you have time to study, the Avatamsaka Sutra is a large one. Tom Cleary, I believe, is the translation I read. Fascinating read. A little redundant, a lot of flowery language, but if you can just read through it, even if you have to, don't stop at every word and try to figure it out, just read through it, you'll get a sense for this liberated spirit, this mind of enlightenment. But of course, from our perspective, we can start to see it. 3,000 years ago, I can't imagine how people heard Shakyamuni speaking. It may be compared to the wish-granting jewel that, though it is a single jewel, is the equal of countless such jewels. For the single jewel can rain down 10,000 treasures which are equal to the treasures brought forth by 10,000 jewels. Again, this language of the bright and shiny and the collection of, it appeals to the samsaric mind, yeah. But it's very easy to miss the point. That all of this wonderful language and vernacular and words can't begin to contain this experience of Gohonzon, the actual Buddha-ness. It can point to it like we can point to a painting and describe many things, but it's not the experience of. And that was the confounding thing, that Shakyamuni had to back off and go, oh, I need to elevate these minds. I have to increase the capacity of people to understand the mechanism at work in their own samsaric minds, so that then they could understand what it is to transcend that mind. So he had to, in a way, start over. And that was 40 years of teaching ensued until he returned to, in his last 8 years of life, to the main point. He condensed it and provided a method that anyone could practice in order to achieve this glorious thing he had experienced that he talked about immediately after his enlightenment, yeah? In the same way, one character of the Flower Garland Sutra is equal to 10,000 characters. The passage that expounds the identity of the mind, the Buddha, and all living things, all living beings, represents the core not only of the Flower Garland teachings, but of the teachings of the Dharma characteristics, the 3 treatises, the true word, and the Tendai schools as well. As you've heard me say many times, Shakyamuni was teaching the same thing throughout. He just was teaching to different levels of capacity of understanding, of insight, gradually raising the bar and redefining these same terms over and over and over again with the knowledge, right? Much greater perceptive knowledge of what that term now means, right? In such a superb sutra, how could there be any truths that are hidden from the hearer? And yet, we find the sutra declaring that persons of the 2 vehicles and ichantikas can never attain Buddhahood. Right? Stated a different way, those of you who think you have mastered the teaching you've substituted your mastery of teaching to your experience of Buddha. And you think that mastering the teaching is the experience of Buddha. No. You just have a better database, a better warehouse. It's still ego. Here is the flaw in the jewel. Moreover, in 3 places the sutra speaks of Shakyamuni Buddha as attaining enlightenment for the first time in this world. You see what he's going to identify. If you think that Shakyamuni attained Buddhahood for the first time in this world, then your impression of Buddha and Buddha-ness is a condition of a human being a man or a woman with this Buddha-ness, like a birthmark or a Boy Scout patch or a Girl Scout cookie. You're not understanding that Buddha-ness is something completely other than this samsaric identification. It transcends all of that. It doesn't need that to be. It thus hides the fact that Shakyamuni Buddha actually attained enlightenment in the remote past, as revealed in the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra. Now, the wording, the way this is translated, adds tremendously to that confusion, doesn't it? Because Shakyamuni doesn't say, I attained Buddhahood in the time without beginning. I attained a state of Buddha which has existed since time without beginning. What a subtle difference, but what a huge difference in understanding the text, yeah? Thus, the Flower Garland Sutra is in fact a chipped jewel. A moon veiled in clouds, a sun in eclipse, a strange thing indeed. The sutras of the Agama, correct and equal, and wisdom periods such as the Mahavajracana Sutra, since they were expounded by the Buddha, are splendid works, and yet they cannot begin to compare with the Flower Garland Sutra. Therefore, one could hardly expect that doctrines concealed even in the Flower Garland Sutra would be revealed in these sutras. Thus, we find that the miscellaneous Agama Sutra speaks of Shakyamuni Buddha as having attained the way for the first time in his present existence. The confusion is built in because Buddha isn't clearly defined as a state of mind, but rather a state of mind that Shakyamuni, a man, achieved. But it's not his. That people aren't getting that. It's not made clear. The Great Collection Sutra says, quote, "It is 16 years since the thus come one first attained the way." See, again, this is a mix-up in terminology. It is 16 years since Shakyamuni attained Buddhahood, but it's not his Buddhahood. And the Vimalakirti Sutra states, quote, "For the first time, the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree and through his might conquered the devil," end quote. No, the Buddha didn't sit beneath the Bodhi tree. Shakyamuni sat beneath the Bodhi tree and attained Buddhahood. You see how this translation problem continues to plague even in Shakyamuni's day? This misunderstanding. Likewise, the Mahavajracana Sutra describes the Buddha's enlightenment as having taken place, quote, "long ago when I sat in the place of meditation," end quote, and the Benevolent King's Wisdom Sutra refers to it as an event of, quote, 29 years, quote, in the past. It is hardly surprising that these sutras should speak in this fashion, but there is something that is an astonishment to both the ear and the eye. This is the fact that the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra also speaks in the same way. The introduction to the Lotus Sutra. In the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra, the Buddha denies the great doctrines such as the Flower Garland Sutra, concept of the phenomenal world as created by the mind alone, the concept of the ocean imprint meditation set forth in the sutras of the correct and equal period, and the Wisdom Sutra concept of mutual identification and non-duality, when he declares, quote, "I've not yet revealed the truth." What? The Immeasurable Meaning Sutra regards the practices taught in the previous sutras as practices that require many kalpas to complete. However, the same sutra says, quote, "In the past I sat upright in the place of meditation for 6 years under the Bodhi tree and was able to gain supreme, perfect enlightenment." He himself. Now, I've pointed this out before. This is an oral teaching, and it was taught in the first person. So if you're paying attention as you're learning to recite and memorize these teachings, when the hell is it going to dawn on you that you're talking about your own enlightenment? An experience of Buddha-ness that transcends identification. Still not made super clear, but you can see the shift happening in the immeasurable meanings. Using the same type of language as the Flower Garland Sutra, the first sutra Shakyamuni preached after his enlightenment, when it talks of the Buddha having attained enlightenment for the first time in this world. But again, there's the Buddha having attained enlightenment for the first time in this world. Man, we need to revise so many writings, because it isn't the Buddha that attained enlightenment. Buddha is enlightenment. It's Shakyamuni that attained enlightenment. It's such a huge misconception, yeah? And still to this day, you'll hear apologists say, yeah, Shakyamuni was the original Buddha. Shakyamuni may have attained the mind of Buddha-ness for the first time in human history, but the Buddha-ness he achieved wasn't created there. It's something he became aware of. Strange as this may seem, we may suppose that since the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra is intended to serve as an introduction to the Lotus Sutra, it deliberately refrains from speaking about doctrines to be revealed in the Lotus Sutra itself. And I think that's a good stopping point for today. And we'll take it up again tomorrow from that point on. Is this making sense? If this is confusing you, the only way I have of knowing that is if you make comments about it. Let me know. You know, it's funny when you discover something for yourself and it's clear in your mind, you can talk about it until you lose your voice. But that doesn't mean that the people you're discussing it with will hear you, understand you in the same way as you understand what you think you're saying. So I'm imploring you, if something doesn't make sense, that's what the comments section is open for. Let's hash it out. Let's find the words that work for you. Or email me somehow. Let's get you on the full tract to experience single-mindedly Buddha-ness. Right? Namo Myo Renge Kyo. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice. Namo Myo Renge Kyo. Help us expand this Sangha by liking and subscribing. That's a Google thing. And it helps us propagate, ultimately, Bodhisattva work, yeah? If you can support this effort, the website, the bookstore, the Mandala store, through either buy an ebook on threefoldlotus.com or a print book if you prefer. The podcasts, free to download. These videos, free. You can use Patreon or PayPal if you just feel inspired for a moment. You have some extra you can share, or regularly, however you choose to do it. I want to make sure you get value for your investment in time and in resources, because it's all about strengthening our practice, yes, and propagation. Namo Myo Renge Kyo. Thank you for your work in that regard. That's it for today. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your health, right? Stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.